Hello, it's Aaron from Workflow86, and today we'll be going through access controls for your workflows. So every workflow has access controls, and the way you interact with this is inside of your workflow. If you click into access here, you'll see the access control panel pop up. Now, in particular, the current access controls relate to any interactive or user-facing components of your workflow. And by that, we mean any components or parts of your workflow which a user or an end user might interact with. So in this case, for example, this contract approval workflow, you can see that there's a form, it goes to an assigned task, there's a whole bunch of conditional workflow, emails, and then another assigned task here. So there are three interactive steps in this workflow. The form, so obviously that's interactive because there is a form that someone needs to submit. The assigned task, so that assigned task will obviously in itself create a form which someone needs to interact with and submit. And then this additional assigned task here. So there are three end user or interactive facing components here. And if we open up the access controls, you'll see that we have access controls for each one of those three steps. Now, into the actual controls themselves. So there are basically two settings for your access controls for your components. So you can either have them public or private. Now, by public, what that does is it makes that particular component accessible to anyone. So essentially, someone does not need to log in order to access, view, and then submit that particular component. So in this case, for example, if we wanted the contract submission form to be public facing, i.e. you could have it embedded on your website and anyone can take a look at it, submit the form, then we would turn it on to public. However, if this is an internal facing form, then we will turn it on to private. And then from there, we will select the users who we want to be able to access it. So in this case, for example, I've selected both of these two users. And what will happen is when someone goes to the URL for this form, they'll be challenged to log in. And then when they log in, depending on whether they have access to it or not, it will then let them through to the form itself. The same thing applies for these other two assigned task steps. Now, where this becomes handy in terms of the ability to select particular users is, for example, if in this case the contract submission form can be submitted by one user, but the subsequent approval steps should only be able to be submitted and accessed by another user. So, for example, in this case, you can actually configure it like this. So the first form can be accessed by this user, but the subsequent approval states can only be accessed by this user. And so even if this user tries to or gets access to the URLs of these two components, they won't actually be able to view it or actually submit that particular task page itself. So once you've done configuring the access controls for each one of the components, all you need to do is click Save. Now, another thing to note about the access controls is the access controls are pointing to your production version. So the access controls themselves, if, for example, you have a workflow that's already deployed in production and all of a sudden you want to turn, I don't know, the first form public, all you need to do is to switch on public and then click Save. You do not need to republish the workflow in order for the access controls to go live into your current published version. And the same thing, if you currently have a workflow which is public and now you want to cut all access to it, all you need to do is turn off the public switch and then click Save. And then whatever version of your workflow is currently live, that its access will also be cut as well. So that is a quick guide to access controls for your workflow.